Their valiant defense was crushed. Now, the long struggle against overwhelming odds approaches a final, desperate stand.
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we are roadie running back to Gears of War. Ladies and gentlemen, I've waited a long time to pull the trigger on a Gears of War retrospective, and now feels like just the perfect time to talk about how fantastic the original trilogy of Gears of War is. Today, we're going to get into how special Gears of War 1, 2, and 3 are. Fret not, we'll do a full series deep dive, including Judgment, Tactics, Gears 4, Gears 5, and so on, when the time is right with the release of a brand new Gears game. But if you need a reminder on if Gears of War really is that good, absolutely. But before any of that, we gotta talk about today's sponsor.
The following video is sponsored by Star Wars Hunters. Well, if the start of May was anything to go by here on Retro Rebound, I love Star Wars. All you have to do is take a look at the entirety of Retro Rebound's uploads, and it speaks for itself. We love Star Wars here, so naturally I'm very excited for Star Wars Hunters. I remember when it was announced, I was like, what is this game? I want to know more. Well, now I don't have to wait to get any answers because it's available as we're speaking right now, and you can go ahead and download it. It's an all-new, free-to-play game with intense 4v4 third-person combat, where you can customize each of the hunters you play as by collecting and equipping them and unlocking new costumes, animations, and weapon appearances. You have new characters to play as, including nefarious bounty hunters, heroes of the rebellion, imperial stormtroopers, and everything in between. And as someone who's a fan of MOBAs and action games, this kind of looks like a hybrid between the two. It's a PvP focused game where each battlefield is inspired by iconic Star Wars locales. And all of this is landing on Nintendo Switch, iOS, and Android. So what are you waiting for? Download Star Wars Hunters right now and battle in arenas themed after the most iconic locations in the galaxy. Season 1 is starting right now. So support me by using the link in the description, and shout out to Star Wars Hunters for sponsoring today's video.
Have you ever wondered why the emotional attachment to franchises from the 360 PS3 generation is stronger then versus nowadays? And it's because stories are broken up across multiple generations. Jack Asbury has our first write-in. You can do the same thing over on patreon.com/retrorevive. It lets us do a lot of experimental content and different videos. So thank you to everyone who's supporting. And he says how Gears of War genuinely gave him some of his fondest gaming memories, whether it was the killer story or the innovative horde mode. And it's weird to think that we got the whole trilogy of games in a single console generation, because you just never get that nowadays. It's so true. It's so funny because nowadays the standard is you'll get your full story over multiple generations. Like, you'll be in a completely different phase of your life. Like, you'll be a high schooler when you're starting the story, and you'll be a middle-aged man with a full-time job and a family by the time the story's done. And I just feel like that's something the games industry's got to figure out, because that is why we have such strong emotional attachments to certain franchises, because we were able to actually see the characters grow in a reasonable amount of time. Like, by the time you finished the game and you were starting to get tired of it, the marketing was picking up for the next thing. Like, there was a continuation, a passing of the baton. Nowadays, it's like when a game is made in 4 years, the question is, how did you do that? How did you figure that out? Because we have such a big problem in our industry with employee retention, with scaling projects properly, inflated budgets, inflated development times. It's awful. So Gears of War is just, I think, a perfect example of how it's done across an entire generation. I think another example across the pond, if you will, is Uncharted. A full story, a full trilogy in a generation. Hey, look at that. It was possible at a certain point. I would love to get back to that. Starting with Gears of War 1 though, let's focus on the actual games now instead of my soapbox ranting about the state of the industry. When I think of the visuals of Gears of War, as I was going back to these games to reflect and remember and create this video for you all, I always had these visuals that come to mind about this game. And what I realized when running through this original trilogy, oh my God, it's all from the original Gears of War. But that makes so much sense, because while the visuals in Gears 2 and Gears 3 are very strong in their own ways, Gears of War 1 is actually a definitive title in Xbox visuals unto itself. Originally, the 360 was supposed to have 250 megabytes of RAM, but then Epic had proposed, here's what Gears of War would look like with 512 megabytes of RAM, which is funny to think about nowadays what Gears could pull off with such a little RAM. But nonetheless, it made a tremendous difference and defined what the 360 would pack in at its launch and enable Gears of War to be at its absolute best. There were two versions of the game pitched, and just one looked wildly, vastly better and more ambitious than the others. And at the time, Gears of War was known as like a visual showpiece that was still incredibly fun to play and had a wonderful pace to it, as we'll really get into with Gears of War 2, where they started to flex their creative muscles with mission design and power weapon design philosophy. Just it gradually got better and better, but Gears of War 1 was one of the most visually impressive games ever. Not only that, but you had iconic series staples introduced. Roadie running, right? Where the camera's shaking and you're sprinting toward your foes. Such a simple thing, but Gears of War never got rid of this. It's wonderful, just charging at your foes full speed, breaking out the chainsaw, hearing Marcus scream bloody murder as you saw a foe in half. Like, these are iconic series staples that are carried the entire generation. It's so good. But you also had some of the best in class third-person shooting, which I know many people scoff at nowadays, like how do you get a third-person shooter wrong? For reference, and I say this as someone who really likes the game, Dirge of Cerberus came out this same year. So I don't want to sit here and pretend like, oh, we all had third-person shooters figured out. There were still many examples then and later. I'll say Alpha Protocol is another example, guilty pleasure of mine. We did not have third-person shooting figured out. Mass Effect, anybody? We didn't have it figured out. So you looked at Gears of War and went, oh my God, this feels good. The dodge rolling, the swapping covers instantaneously, the roadie running, the movement was impeccable, if not just simple. This was the staple for how third-person shooters just need to be done. I mentioned at the top of this visuals, though. I want to get back to that because of the Regency Britain architecture here. I just think it's so strong and prevalent. It's mostly due to the color palette used. Much of the 360 generation was dominated by games that were always getting trolled by fans for being this brown, gray color palette. I, as someone who loves Fallout 3, funny enough, always trolled that game for just looking brown. I'm like, this is just such a brown game. But you start to realize, I think, as you age and your taste age as well, that the design behind Gears of War 1's visuals was really thoughtful. I understand if someone thinks it's ugly, and I think the Ultimate Edition did a lot of favors for the product. But having the dominant colors be brown and gray in this game and having the shadows do a lot of work creates a very oppressive, hopeless atmosphere. And that's kind of the idea. The planet was just destroyed by this entire alien race after all. So yeah, you kind of want to focus in on a color palette that makes things feel hopeless. And the game's mission structure kind of follows the visuals in that sense. So for example, you don't really get this across the trilogy, but one of the most memorable chapters for me was during Nightfall, where you have to go through segments of the dark and shoot gas barrels and put out lights to make sure that you don't get eaten alive out there, because when you're in the dark, that's it, you're done for. As I'll talk about with later Gears games, just the mission-to-mission pacing and how they throw a new challenge or a new enemy type or a new weapon your way is phenomenal, borderline perfect. And this is really where you start to feel it kick in, right? Gears of War 1, it leans a bit on its third-person shooting, its world building, because they didn't know what they had at this point. So you don't get a rich character-focused story like you do in Gears 2 and 3. But once they knew they had something, they went all in with Gears of War 2. Now, I apologize. I thought I had Gears of War 1 complete in box. In fact, I know I did. But it was platinum hits, so I kind of donated it because I thought, oh, I'll buy Gears of War 1 when the time is right. When the time was right to make this video, I went to go to my shelf to get ready to film this video. I went, I don't have Gears of War 1. But fret not, as you can see, I have Gears 2 and 3, so we'll go through those complete in box when we do our full series deep dive. I'll make sure I have Gears of War 1 ready for you. So Gears of War 2, the game running behind me right now. Oh man, this is where I really started to fall in love. It's really with the more emotional story here that focuses a lot around Dom and his wife, his hunt for her and what's happened to her and the emotional payoff you get at the end. This is where by the end of this story, you realize, I really, really care about these characters. And it's funny because I think Gears is a perfect example of doing a lot with a little. Little conversations back and forth between these characters do so much to build the world and the plot without what a lot of games suffer from nowadays, which is a ton of exposition, a ton of character building, a ton of dialogue. And I think there's a place for that, a particular genre for that. RPGs, JRPGs, I think there's a place for very dialogue, character-rich games. But somehow Gears of War manages to be one of the most action-packed franchises and one of the most character-rich franchises, despite these comically huge-looking characters, right? Beefy armors, biceps the size of my torso. Like, they're ridiculous looking. It's a ridiculous world, but you care about them, and it's because of very compelling stories like the ones told in Gears 2. At the same time, though, you get moments like, it's a giant friggin' worm! We're command control, it's a giant worm! It's just, you get ridiculousness and then heartfelt moments all throughout. It's such a fun-filled series. It's lightning in a bottle in that I don't think you can intentionally go out of your way to make something like this. You kind of just have to follow your emotions and be like, I want to do something very serious that makes you feel things, but we're going to still have some fun with certain moments and ridiculous voice acting and body proportions. And there's where you get Gears of War, this very special, unique series. So this isn't just where the story started to take off. This is where the, I would call it, Halo power weapon design philosophy kicked off. Meatball really honed in on this, saying, one thing I really loved about the Gears franchise was the weapon variety. Of course, there's the classic chainsaw gun, but shout out to the sniper rifle, shotgun, and the Hammer of Dawn. I remember each one feeling really tight and satisfying to use. The Hammer of Dawn speaks for itself. Shooting a laser from space was every teenager's wet dream in 2007. So yeah, going through this trilogy again and just feeling out the pacing, I mean, it's marvelous. It really is, because every mission, there's a new enemy type or a new weapon you find that you can use in a unique way, or a unique mission setup. I talked about things like Nightfall, where you have to navigate things a bit differently, be a bit more aware of your environment, versus standard cover shooting, versus, hey, we have the Hammer of Dawn, this is a big moment for the player, versus, hey, here's this new sniper rifle, or hey, you're gonna man the turret on this mission. Like, there's so many examples across the campaign. And also, I think they do a really good job of keeping you mobile, moving from one point to the next. You don't really stand on one objective for too long. And Halo follows much of the same design philosophies. I think that's why many Gears fans also loved Halo, and vice versa. I think it's why it grew so much during the 360 generation, because Halo was at its peak with Halo 3, and then you had a series that was in third person following a lot of the design philosophy that Halo did, which is power weapons. Gears, especially in its multiplayer, was a lot about power weapons. Now, I'll admit, I didn't get fully into Gears of War multiplayer. Like, even when I was playing it at its most, I liked Horde mode, which was introduced here in Gears of War 2. So this again is where they know is, oh, we got something here. Nowadays, when you hear Horde mode, you're like, okay, of course, like, yeah, throw that in there. You got decent combat. Or a boss rush mode, yeah, of course, yeah, throw that in there. But Gears of War 2 is really where Horde mode began, and it was so compelling. I always remember with my friends, like, core Xbox Live memories of hopping into party chat and just seeing how long we could go in Gears of War Horde mode. Why did this work out well? I think it's because Call of Duty Zombies was becoming a thing at this point in time, and so you had Zombies that was really popular. You had this other Horde mode here. Like, they were thinking about things differently. Like, Gears of War said, hey, the shooting and fighting is the best part, and getting power weapons is the best feeling. Do that with your friends. And kind of the same thing with Zombies, where it's like getting the best weapons and the best upgrades and surviving as long as you can is the best part about this. So again, I think it was just every developer had the right mindset at the right time. This is where multiplayer games were a very complete package. You could ship a game with Horde mode, campaign, and multiplayer and deliver something special. And last but not least, this is where, you know, tradition started to begin, like Carmine dying every game. Again, it felt like with Gears of War 2, okay, this is the beginning of something, right? This is like, we knew Gears of War 1 was great. I want more of this now after Gears 2. And so that brings us to Gears of War 3, what many people think is the best in the franchise. But first, we do have a complete box copy of Gears of War 2, so let's check that out because it's pretty awesome. All right, here we have Gears of War 2 complete in box. One thing I miss about the Xbox 360 exclusives is this up here. I love this stamp. They had it on the original Xbox. They had it for a little bit on the 360, little teaser here, but you'll see that Gears of War 3 doesn't have that anymore, and they kind of just gradually got rid of it. Maybe I'm a bit of a traditionalist, but I just love this old exclusive stamp. Obviously, with the way Xbox is going nowadays, a multi-platform, a little less relevant, but I always felt it went a long way for me. Like, you know how you have that PlayStation brand identity, that Nintendo brand identity? This was something that was really important to me growing up. Maybe I'm overstating its importance, but I do miss that stamp a lot. It felt like, oh yeah, that's an Xbox exclusive. Anyway, back in the box, rambling aside, you're going to be blown away, indeed, because this complete box copy is really good. Winter approaches, war rages on, entire cities are sinking, swallowed by a new threat from below. Soon humanity will have nothing left to defend. Only one option remains, an all-out attack on the Locust Horde. with HD gaming's new standard, like I talked about a bit with how Gears of War 1 was just tremendous in the visuals department. They're really embracing that here, saying innovative controls and unmatched intensity make Gears one of the best-selling Xbox games ever. Breakthrough advances in Unreal Engine 3 raised the bar again. For those not really up to date with game development stuff, Unreal Engine 5 is the current version now. So we've come some ways here. A blockbuster experience. It says use enemies as shields, fight chainsaw duels, and discover new monsters, weapons, and vehicles in emotional campaigns of loss and retribution. And of course, explosive Xbox Live Play, the most visceral online shooter, gets even better with a new party system, more co-op modes, and true skill matchmaking. Look at that, a little skill-based matchmaking. Now here on the inside, fantastic manual. It also comes with one of the most interesting promotional slips. Now you see this and originally you're like, oh yeah, well this is Xbox energy, right? We have all the accessories here. Remember this type of stuff? This is what blows my mind with the Xbox 360's tremendous success is, people were thinking that it was a bridge too far to get, say a memory card for your PS Vita. But the system that was best known for online play, you had to buy a wireless adapter that didn't come packaged into the console until much later in its lifespan when it was tremendously successful. On the back here, you have Fable 2 getting promoted. Like, what an era, again with that stamp, what an era. You're thinking like, well, on the inside, what product they're promoting? Another Xbox game, right? Battlestar Galactica. So yeah, this is quite the promotional package here. I thought it was absolutely hilarious. Just a weird trip down memory lane there all across the spectrum. And then we have the manual here. It starts off with a really, I love when there are developer letters. There's one here from design director Cliff Bleszinski, just talking about how, games ask for a lot of their players. More importantly, it's the engagement. And they kind of built this around a blockbuster experience, which you really feel in the game. A little bit of a story recap here, like where we stand. And they go through all the weapons. As you can see here, fully illustrated, just breaking down every element of the game. Love the Scorcher flamethrower, so cool. The long shot sniper rifle, so satisfying to hit a headshot with that. All the grenade types. Yeah, look at all these weapons. Like I said, this is where that design philosophy kicked in for Halo. I feel like it was a huge influence for what Gears of War did with all the power weapons. At least as a player, that's how it comes across. They break down the UI down to the Crimson Omen. I actually didn't know until I checked this manual what it was called, but that is your life bar. As you gradually take damage, you know how it goes. This just fills up the middle of your screen. Nowadays, I feel people would lose their mind if your health bar was pretty much right in the middle of the screen, but it's just such a staple in Gears of War that no one thinks too much about it. Active reload. How could I have missed talking about this thus far? Definitive mechanic for Gears of War to give you that damage bonus if you hit it right in the perfect sweet spot. Of course, success gives you a quicker reload time. Super important in the competitive side of things, but also in the campaign. The cover and maneuverability in the game, we already touched on just how phenomenal that is. All the options you have from campaign to co-op to multiplayer, what each match does. They talked about a new matchmaking type at the back end of the box. You have Annex, King of the Hill. I was awful at Gears of War multiplayer, not the best, but here is the full manual. So yeah, pretty chunky one and a really great complete in-box experience for Gears of War 2. Dexterous Joe has our final write-in of the video. He says, Gears 3 was an epic conclusion to the franchise at the time. The story and the main character send-offs were amazing. This was my first special edition console I purchased with my own money. Can we all agree that Gears 4 and 5 simply do not match the quality of the originals? Should Xbox leave the franchise alone? Take care and keep the retroness alive. I'll admit, it's really tough to match the heights of Gears of War 3, and I understand why many people are down on Gears 4 and 5. Me personally, I think Gears of War 4 is like the Force Awakens of the Gears franchise. Plays it very safe, does nothing particularly amazing, but in my opinion as well, does nothing really wrong either. Gears 5 has arguably the best first half of the franchise, and then falls off pretty tremendously afterwards, and has a cliffhanger ending that finally we may be getting some answers to. But also, something that Cliffy B, who is the creator of Gears of War, has been really outspoken about is that what Coalition is doing with Gears of War now and how they, I'll just say, didn't make a choice at the time was kind of cowardly. And I can agree with that. Gears of War 2 and 3 made some really tough decisions for their characters. It didn't really leave room for the player to guess and wonder what if or what's going to happen here. And I think there's no better example of that than Gears 3. Now, while I love 4 and 5, and again, we'll talk about that later on, I think Gears 3 really represents best what Gears is all about. The character send-offs are amazing. And if you haven't played Gears of War, as you've noticed, I danced around spoilers for 2, I'm going going to dance around spoilers for 3 as well, because I think it's really important if you haven't played these games. This is like one of those moments where I remember, think about what happened with like Hogwarts Legacy or what happened with Spider-Man 2, where there are these spoilers in these games, some being maliciously spread, some being spread out of excitement. Think of when your favorite TV show hits a streaming service and everyone's talking about it on Twitter immediately. That kind of energy when social media was very young, that wasn't super prevalent, but somehow Gears of War 3 was being, in my experience, and this is more anecdotal, just massively spoiled. Like everyone was talking about one particular big moment, and I will just say, even knowing about it going in, it still hit me like a truck. That's a choice of words. Anyway, this is the emotional climax, truly, and it's because it's not just a Dom and Marcus story here. It involves Anya, it involves A-Train, it involves Baird, etc. This is a character-driven story, but what I noticed with Gears 3 most, beyond its phenomenal, what we thought was finale at the time, is its co-op focus. As you've noticed, I've waited a long while to talk about this. Gears of War has always been a very good co-op series, but what Gears of War 3 did really well was, oh my God, the level design. So when you would go to a level in Gears of War, some of them, for example, one of my favorites where A-Train goes back to the stadium he used to play in, you would have an upper level and a lower level. What this meant is that when you were playing in co-op, you would get one area, your friend would get the other. And so you'd strategize a bit and you'd actually be covering each other's backs. There was really unique missions throughout these campaigns where you would have to like cover your friend while they're completing one mission across the map and you're doing something else. And I just thought, you know what? I hate to be that guy who's always like, man, we don't get it like we used to nowadays. But seriously, like co-op games are usually open world fairs, trying to create a lot of gameplay freedom and seldom times letting you play a story together. That's why when Larian dropped Baldur's Gate 3 and it was full co-op, I'm like, dude, this is why Larian's the GOAT, man. They were doing that with Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2. And I just feel like traditional co-op driven games are a lost cause nowadays. And I get it. What we learned leading from the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation into Xbox One and PS4 is many developers wanted to push fidelity. And if that wasn't clear back then, it's very clear now. Developers are obsessed with pushing fidelity. Do I get that? Absolutely not, but here I am running a retro channel, so what do I know? Nonetheless, when you start to do co-op, you have to render scenes for 2 different players, meaning you have to lower the visual quality. Again, this makes Gears of War extremely impressive. It was already a graphical showpiece, and it was doing all of this stuff, pushing the 360 forward, which is why it was like a powerhouse console for so long, because all the exclusives were going there. It was showing out. It was the PS4 for Xbox at the time, right? They were just trouncing Sony for a long while until they stopped producing 360s, and then PlayStation caught all the way up. But this is just the pinnacle co-op rich game. You have amazing missions like you're defending an entire fortress from the Locust invading, and you're raining down fire from turrets. You have missions underwater inside vehicles. This is peak mission variety. This is peak co-op. I mean, this is what Gears of War is all about. Just carrying all those design philosophies forward, maintaining them, strengthening them, more importantly, not going too far off the board, but making sure you're doing more things. When you look at Gears of War 1, just third-person shooting. To go to Gears of War 3, more colorful, more vibrant, bigger than ever, more playable characters, more paths to go down, more exploration, more collectibles, more mission types. They absolutely nailed it. Complete pinnacle of the series, including the horde mode, including multiplayer being at its height. Just an absolutely wonderful send-off for the trilogy. And this was like the duo throughout the end of the 360's lifespan. You had Halo 3, people were still playing, and you'd bounce between that and Gears of War 3. Like, an absolutely incredible time for Xbox fans. I remember it so well. I mean, I spent most of my time on Halo 3, but oh my God, Gears of War is just such a special franchise, and I hope you all take some time to experience it for yourselves. Let's take a look at a complete box copy of Gears of War 3, and then we'll sign out. All right, Gears of War 3. This is a little thin, right? This is later in the 360 generation, so I get it. I don't have to like it, but I get it. They call it a bona fide masterpiece. With survivors scattered and civilizations in ruins, time is running out for Delta Squad in the spectacular conclusion to one of the most celebrated sagas in video games. Like here, you just thought that was it. Like this was going to be the end, but in fact, they kept going for multiple more entries. They say here, play the biggest ever Gears campaign solo, split screen, or with 4 players live. You also have challenge your friends on fast and fair dedicated multiplayer servers. Big deal back then. Cannot emphasize that enough. And Horde and Beast modes delivered the ultimate co-op experience. So yeah, they were just covering all the ground. They should be really proud of this trilogy, anyone who's worked on it. Here on the inside, it's a little thin. You do get some stickers, some Gears of War stickers. So, you know, nice little collectible there. I plan on just saving those forever, never using them. You know, collector's mindset, you know how it goes. And then yeah, just a paper slip with safety precautions and game controls. And then one little thing here up the top, Hope, Survival, Brotherhood. That's all they could really muster outside of the controls. Otherwise, that's it. That's your complete in box for Gears 3. So yeah, end of an era, not just for the series, but also for complete in boxes. So that's Gears of War 3. So that's it. Is Gears of War really that good? Yes. Should you play it? Absolutely, if you get the chance to. It's just fantastic. It really is. And when you play it, you're going to find yourself yearning for this era of games. I do promise you that. There's a special feel to it. It's not too big. It's not too small. Like, it's just such a 360-ass game. Like, I don't know how else to put it, but there's a special feel to those types of games. And there are some nowadays still being made with that 360 spirit, but they're just few and far between. So nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on Gears of War. I'm looking forward to hearing yours down below. And with that, I will catch you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.
And again, thanks to Star Wars Hunters for sponsoring today's video. Use my link and join the arena today.